Welcome to Frequency. I'm Chuck Gose.
And I'm Jenni Field. Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture and employee experience, beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. And I'm going to kick things off today with a fat cat of Santorini. So I was away last week in Santorini for a friend's wedding, which was fabulous. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Fisher. And while we were in the lovely Greek island of Santorini, we went to find the fat cat of Santorini, which is literally a fat cat who is called Bruya and has over 30,000 followers on Instagram, and essentially saved this shop in Santorini because it was going to close, people weren't going, tourism, all those challenges. And then they created this account for the cat that belongs to the store owner, and it saved the shop. And people keep walking past to take photos of the fat cat. And people have posted that they've built their entire honeymoon around going to check out this internet cat. And it just brought me some joy, this little chubby cat. So we'll put some pictures up when we release this episode.
You know, when I saw that item in our notes, my brain went in like 20 different directions. It was like, is this like a kid's story? Because I could see there being a kid's story like the fat cat of Santorini.
Yeah.
Or is this like mafia based? It went a lot of different places, right? Like a fat cat, not the animal. But then to me, like, this is a great example, like the power of mascots. The power of having like an identity, and often the four-legged creatures are the best mascot out there. And so that just shows the power, and you don't have to overthink this either.
No, it's so cute. And it was just lovely. And all these people kept walking past. And we ended up having to hire a car to get there because it was the other side of the island to where we were staying. So we had this whole trip planned. So we had to see the fat cat, as we called it, a side quest for the holiday. But it was lovely. But I'll send you a picture of the fat cat. It's just beautiful. The other thing I wanted to kick us off with is a new word I heard this week called Otroverts. Or Otroverts.
Oh boy.
I'm not sure which one it is. Hang on. Let me get the post up on Instagram to talk about this, because I saved it this week and thought this is perfect for a conversation with Chuck. Right. So psychiatrists recognize a new personality type known as Otrovert. I think it's Otrovert. Could be Otrovert. O-T-R-O.
I'm gonna go with the hard O on that.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So basically saying that these are people who are not fueled by solitude and they're not energized by the spotlight. Psychiatrists are naming this third path. These individuals feel their best in the company of others, yet they don't need constant chatter or the intensity of extroverted energy to thrive. The term was formally recognized by professionals in 2025 after clinicians began noticing patterns that didn't fit introversion or extroversion. So apparently we, and I'm going to claim myself as this, enjoy meaningful presence, shared experiences and calm companionship, unlike extroverts who chase stimulation or introverts who seek retreat. I nearly said a rude word then. Nonsense or new science.
I mean, it's one of those things. People, we as much as we love mascots, we love labels.
We do.
And it feels like this is like people reading like their like astrology or something like that, where it's like, oh, this like it's the stuff in the newspaper, like, oh, this applies to me. Like read what an Otrovert is again.
They are not fueled by solitude and they are not energized by the spotlight. They feel their best in the company of others, yet they don't need constant chatter or the intensity of extroverted energy to thrive.
That feels like 99% of the people, probably 99% of the time.
Yeah. But I've always said this about myself, because on a Myers-Briggs, I'm an E, extroverted.
Don't even say you don't want the spotlight. Don't even suggest that you don't want the spotlight.
I think we need to take this to a little side conversation.
That's where I'm going to call BS on that one. But let's get into our articles this week. We've got Gallup's 5 dependable layers of engagement and which ones leaders still underfeed. Fresh evidence that post-pandemic personality shifts may be reshaping culture. Why the Netherlands' near-norm 4-day work week is changing the global conversation about hours versus output. and a new frame for people pleasing at work that managers should recognize fast. We're going to begin, though, with a tweet from Adam Grant on RTO. So there's new analysis of more than 3 million tech and finance workers that finds a clear pattern. After companies impose return to office mandates, employee turnover rises with the biggest losses among top performers and women, and hiring is also getting tougher. Related summaries also note that no profit boost alongside drops in satisfaction and work-life balance. So we've got no profit boost, but we've got drops in satisfaction and work-life balance, and you're losing your top performers and your women. Jenni, it sounds like return to office is going swimmingly so far. So I'm curious, with an inflexible RTO policy, is that basically like a retention tax? Is that forcing people to stick around? And what guardrails would you insist on before communicating any of these mandates?
So I think the data is really interesting. Tech and finance workers is very specific. So I would say that. I would wonder whether you would find the same patterns in other professions. Just to throw a little inkwell into the data. I still think it's about trying to bring people back together to try and get rid of siloed working. I don't think it's the right solution, but I think that in terms of those guardrails that you have to insist on to communicate, for me, it has to be about a trial and a bit of test and learn. I don't think you can say we're going back to the office full time and that's forever. I think much like we've had different things we're testing, I think if I was communicating that and I was having those conversations advising leaders, I'd be talking about how long do we want to test this for and what are our measures of success? And I think that's the bit that's important when it comes to insisting on these kind of mandates, because the data is screaming that this doesn't work. It's screaming that hybrid works better in all industries, by all accounts. And so I think we have to really think about what it is we're trying to achieve and then how we're going to measure that.
I think we really want to think that this is about bringing people back together. But the more and more I'm seeing this, I think it is this lazy way to have attrition in your organization. And I think that they're paying a bigger price than they realize. I think all organizations, I think we saw that where anytime they do a layoff, they get roasted, and maybe for very valid reasons. But if you are kind of forcing people to leave and they're leaving on their own accord, you could be like, hey, not our fault. But the price they're paying are top performers and women leaving. And if you need to replace any of those people, it is getting tougher. So I don't know that they're running the math on this. I think they're just seeing that initial, like, yeah, we got everybody back, but aren't looking at the long-term consequence of it. And that's what I'm curious to see as we look out a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Will those companies have to retreat, or will they be doubling down on their decisions?
I think there's also something about where do these people go? So if you're losing top performers and women in the tech and finance industry, but everyone is doing the return to office like where are these people going? Like, are they just becoming, is everyone becoming a consultant? Though? Well, I feel like they do follow suit. I feel like there's been a bit of a run of, and this company, and this company, and this company in these sort of sectors that have sort of followed suit. I don't think it's all of them, but I think there seems to be a pattern that would suggest it's going to continue.
And I would say it's more of an imitation than anything else on it. Next, we've got Gallup's 5 key drivers of employee engagement. Gallup distills engagement into 5 levers that leaders control: purpose, development, caring managers, ongoing conversations, and a focus on strengths. Gallup's data also reminds us that managers account for about 70% of the variance in team engagement, with highly engaged teams linked to productivity, profitability, and fewer safety incidents. Jenni, we have talked ad nauseum about this word engagement and how the many definitions on it, but I think Gallup's is one that is somewhat widely accepted across a lot of corporations. When you looked at those 5, purpose, development, caring managers, ongoing conversations, and a focus on strengths, which do you feel is like most underfed or malnourished in real organizations right now? And what's the fastest credible way? I know that's one of your favorite words, Jenni, credibility. Fastest credible way to close that gap? Or are these 5 levers just simply too simple?
So I loved this insight. And obviously we've talked about Gallup quite a lot on here after I read the Culture Shock book. So I think it is very simple, but it reminded me of the insight that was probably more dominant in the UK, which was from Engage for Success, which was a government task force back in 2009 that looked at the enablers of engagement. And they were having a strategic narrative, engaging managers, employee voice, and organizational integrity. So when I look at what's coming through from Gallup, and they're 5, we've got some similarities, I think, here. So strategic narrative, purpose, engaging managers, caring managers, employee voice, ongoing conversations. This organizational integrity doesn't necessarily sit in focus on strengths and development that are coming through from Gallup. And I think that's a real sign of actually what's important to people in organizations today. I think organizational integrity is important, but I think this data would suggest some others. So I think you can map it a bit, but I think it shows a shift that I'm not sure leaders and HR and comms have caught up with in terms of what's important to drive engagement. I don't think they're too simple, because I think they're simple, but I think they're hard at the same time. Like, it sounds simple, like, caring managers. Oh, that should be very simple. Alas, here we are. So I think there is something about the simplicity, but what's required for that depth of work that's important. And in terms of that question about the sort of credible way to close that gap, I think you've got to look at each of these different areas and make a plan for each of them, and a genuine plan in line with your culture, where you are now, where you want to be, how you get there. It's different for everybody. And it's work I do with clients all the time around, this is where you are. So in order for us to improve these different elements, it's going to be a different process to get there to do that. And you've got to give it time. That's the biggest thing.
I think it's so clear in its simplicity, which is why I asked that question, because when I was looking at those 5 levers, and you look at, if you're HR, if you're in comms, whatever, and just look at yourself as an employee, if you know why you're doing it, why you're doing the job, you feel like the company encourages your development, you've got a manager that you think really does care about you and the team, you're part of ongoing conversations, and you get to showcase what you're great at the organization, it's almost like, how could you not then be engaged in what the organization is doing? So it really could be that simple. I think what happens is, though, which we've talked about on past episodes, about that thinning out of that management layer and just being completely eliminated from some organizations. If you have 20, 30 direct reports, it's almost impossible. You might care about them as a team, but to have like caring conversations with every single person and knowing what every single person's strength, I mean, it's, again, just that burden that we're putting on managers is not setting themselves up for success.
Yeah. And it is that conversation piece in that Culture Shock book. They talk about having a 30-minute meaningful conversation every week. If you've got to do that with 20 or 30 people every week, that is such a significant part of your time, which is near impossible to do. So I think you're right. And that's what I mean about the reality of what this means and the work that's involved to do it. It's very easy to throw these things away. I think it's like when I've talked in the past about other research I've done about deskless workers, and you say, it's culturally, different. They're a verbal culture. Office workers are a written culture. And everyone goes, yeah, we know that. And I'm like, alas, we're not doing it. We're not doing the work to really change that. And I think what this screams for me is that anyone listening in internal comms, in HR, in leadership development, is we have to do the work. Like, that's where the focus needs to be. If you want that retention, you want that link to profits and turnover, this is where the work is. And I think we are easily distracted by other stuff.
Next up, we've got new research that suggests a small but meaningful personality drift since the pandemic. Younger adults show declines in agreeableness and conscientiousness and an uptick in neuroticism, roughly the size of a decade of change compressed into just 2 years. Data journalists have zeroed in on conscientiousness failing among the young, which has obvious implications for how we design culture and work itself. So, Jenni, I'm curious, other than having to say conscientiousness several times, which is actually really hard, if the baseline is moving, What should leaders and communicators tweak first? Is it expectations? Is it the rituals of the business? Or is it something as simple as the cadence of feedback that employees have? What do you think here?
So I love that you've brought this to the conversation, because Sarah Black actually shared that with me or with us. I can't remember, but she sent it over and she was saying to me that while it's very interesting, the data on this is just in the US. So there is another note of caution on data for me today. I'm that person in this episode, that this is just US-based data. But I think there is something in this. If I think back to conversations we had a while ago from the author of The Anxious Generation and some of the data that came through there about almost the same thing, conscientiousness, failing and falling in the young. So I think there's something in this a bit longer term. What I think is the thing in terms of the thing to tweak first would be expectations, because I think that's where it's all going a bit wrong. I think that there are things around that expectation alignment that has such a link to employee experience and engagement and your communication experience that isn't talked about enough in terms of what you're expecting. And I don't think the younger generation are being prepared for the realities of work and what that work means and what's expected of you. And therefore, I think that could be having a knock-on effect to conscientiousness, which I'm not saying again.
Yeah, I think for me, the surprising note was the fact that they said this is a change that happens, but it's that compression of the change. That normally what would take 10 years to get to this point is now at 2. And I think that's that acceleration or compression, whatever word you want to use there. That's the interesting part for me. So it shows that there's a different dynamic that's at play that hasn't been around in previous decades when they looked at this.
Do you think that's linked to the conscientiousness of the leaders that people are seeing around the world, whether it's in business or politics, and whether they're seeing a lack of that and therefore it's having a knock-on effect to how they perceive things should be?
I do. We talked about like long COVID, I think it was called, where people have sort of those symptoms that just continue on years after. I wonder if we're seeing some of that here too, with just the way we are as human beings and the way we interact with each other and the way we interact at work and outside of work. And that we're just seeing that had a bigger change on us than simply wearing masks and social distancing and health issues and all of those things, that there could be a bigger play here. And I don't necessarily know what that is, but it just feels like that has to have had an impact on this.
And I think it's that question, isn't it, of the implications of how we design culture and work, and because of the compression and how jarring that might feel to people that have been in work a long time. That's a cauldron of unpleasantness, I'm going to say. Like that's a lot to unpack, I think, for people and organizations.
Yeah, now I'm imagining all like the senior leaders of a team standing over this cauldron, like stirring the pot of things.
You're going to do an AI image for this episode, aren't you? Of all these leaders around a cauldron.
I like it. Next up, so this is not US only, Jenni, just so we're clear.
Thank you.
Across Europe, the shorter week is moving from experiment to operating model. In the Netherlands, a de facto 4-day, which is roughly a 32-hour week, is now more common, and productivity has held up, with more than half of women and nearly 1 in men working under 30 hours. In the UK, most companies from this 2022 pilot kept the policy, and newer trials again report lower burnout and better retention. Belgium took a different route, giving employees a legal right to compress a standard week into 4 longer days, which is flexibility without reducing total hours. And Portugal's government-backed pilot saw 95% of firms rate the shift positively, with reported gains in well-being and no major productivity loss. Jenni, if a leadership team says, let's try a 4-day week, do you push toward true hour reduction or a compressed schedule? And we've talked about that before. Are you trying to get more done in less time? Does it actually help you or not? And how would you communicate the trade-offs for people that are frontline and customer-facing teams so it feels fair and feasible, because they might not be able to do a 4-day week?
I think this all comes down to understanding the data in your organization, your culture, because you're right, this is more across Europe. But if I go back to that data from Gallup on the 4-day week and the 5-day week and what that was all signaling from a global survey, that was almost saying the opposite, that the 4-day week was actually contributing to more burnout and not having the benefits, which again is interesting because it's kind of almost opposite to this. But I think it all comes down to your point of how you communicate it. Is it a reduction or compressed schedule? And actually, what are you really trying to achieve? And there's also a different culture, I think, towards work in places like the Netherlands and Belgium and Portugal that would be different for people in the US and the UK and other parts of the world. And I think we have to be mindful of that. I think when someone comes and says, let's try a 4-day week, why? To what end, which is my favorite question, is what's that trying to achieve? Because I think it's a very quick solution to try to engage people more and give them more time back without really considering the implications of that in terms of people then having to work more and then having to have toil and all the stuff that goes with that. So I think we have to learn more about what we're trying to achieve and have that discussion about true hour reduction or compressed schedule, because I don't think people are having that. I think then the trade-offs with the frontline and the customer-facing teams is figuring out what they want more of. And again, this was in the Gallup stuff that I was reading, which was that actually what the frontline and customer-facing teams want is not what they're getting from their HR colleagues. They want more paid time off, whereas what they're getting is maybe their ability to choose shifts. That's maybe not quite right. So I think it comes back to knowing your people and what they need, because they might not want a 4-day week, but they might want more paid time off, which could balance out in terms of how you're figuring out that people doing 4 days, essentially they are getting more paid time off because they're not working a Friday or a Monday. How do you mirror that for frontline and customer facing? So there's lots of conversations to be had, but I think it's what are we trying to achieve by doing this? And is it actually possible with the work that you do, I think is a big one.
I think that's the biggest question. And I think for a lot of what I would describe typically office-based jobs, people that are already remote or hybrid before clearly can do this. I'm wondering this because I'm all about the negotiation of it and giving employees choices. If you said employees, hey, when you're working, you're in the office, you can choose 5 8-hour days, or you can choose 4 10-hour days. And I wonder what people would choose. My hunch says that a lot of people would choose those 4 10-hour days.
Yeah, same.
And ultimately what would end up happening is they would probably, you and I are guilty of this as well, Jenni, we'd probably end up doing some work on that 5th day, but we'd feel like we at least had some freedom to it. But it goes back to your point earlier, which is the why, like to what end. So if the office mandates are truly like, we need to have people in the office 5 days a week, like for whatever reason, then yeah, the 4-day work week's not gonna cut it. I'm not saying there's a legitimate reason for that. If it's true, like we want people in the office 40 hours a week, okay, why can't that be 4 days? And you're probably gonna get a few more hours out of people anyway. What I think is interesting, so I worked at a company that when I was, maybe this was 4 or 5 years ago, reading the first time and I heard about people doing 4-day work weeks, I was like, oh my gosh, we could totally do this. This is absolutely within the realm of possibility. And what, every weekend is a long weekend and all these amazing things. And I went to our leadership team, and before I could even finish this sentence, they were like, no, no. I was like, no, no. Like there was just complete off the table, not up for negotiation, not up for discussion. You could give all the data in the world, it would not have mattered, which kind of was puzzling to me at the time. But now seeing how other leadership teams around the world are acting, it's sort of like, oh, this is just what some people think.
And I think I love that it's just a flat no, not even going to discuss it. But you reminded
honestly,
me.
That's actually what I need.
Yeah.
Because if you give me even an inch, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, you're not going to win. So you reminded me as you were talking then, which I'd sort of forgotten, that my second job was for a large defense organization, which had a big manufacturing part to it. And I was in the PR and comms team. And every Friday we finished at 1:00 because the manufacturing teams all finished at 1:00 on a Friday, because it was sort of an old way of doing things. So every Friday we'd finish at 1, which meant that my Friday would consist of coming into the office, probably a bit hungover because I was of that age, having a cooked breakfast in the canteen with the team at about 9:30 until about 10:30, 11, and then doing a couple of hours work before going home. It was optional for the office staff. And I wasn't on a manufacturing site. I was in the head office of that division, but it was optional as to whether or not you wanted to leave at 1, but you could. And I would say 80% of the staff probably in head office did it. But it was a nice way of bringing everyone together. But that was essentially, 4.5-day week, which I absolutely took for granted now.
One, it sounds like a lovely way to do a Friday.
It was great.
And people had the choice.
Yeah.
So you knew people that were there wanted to be there. There was something they were getting out of being there. Then the choice comes into play.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, we're going to wrap this up with, as we say in our house, Jenni, every day is a school day. And so I'm learning new things every day. And this article is something new that I learned, which is, what is fawning and how can it hurt your career? On the surface, it looks like model employee behavior: instant yeses, conflict avoidance, heroic responsiveness. But this piece in Fast Company argues that those patterns can be a trauma response called fawning, not engagement. Psychotherapist Ingrid Clayton defines fawning as, quote, becoming more appealing to the threat, which often thrives in rigid, status-driven environments and can quietly erode boundaries and creativity. The article proposes unfawning, which is things like naming the pattern, rebuilding boundaries, and relearning disagreement, as a healthier path forward. So, Jenni, how should leaders adjust performance signals so we stop rewarding appeasement as excellence? And what's a comms-friendly way to normalize respectful no's without turning this into some kind of pop psychology at work discussion?
So I have to admit, I did sort of roll my eyes when I was reading this article.
You did?
I did. Because I just thought, oh, come on. I do think that there is, I just don't really buy it. And I don't see, I see learned helplessness quite a lot, but I don't like the trauma response language about work. And I know that there are some people that have had a very genuinely, trauma response and been diagnosed with elements of PTSD and things like that. This feels like it's making a bit of a mockery of actual sort of trauma responses that people would have through work. And so that's why I was a bit eye-rolly about it. But nevertheless, to answer your question...
I'm waiting for this butt part to come in.
So the whole point of this is about giving people the ability to create boundaries, have productive disagreement, all of those things. All of this for me comes back to leadership, giving people permission to do that. And I know that sounds like, oh, leaders shouldn't be giving people permission. But there is the hierarchy, that power dynamic exists. As a leader in an organization, you have to be the one to make sure that those boundaries are there. If people are overworking, if they're appeasing, if they're doing all of these things, then you need to be the one to say, look, it's okay to not do that. It's okay to stop doing this, because we have to recontract that relationship to move that forward. And I don't believe that an individual is going to do that without a leader giving them the permission to do that if they are fawning, because they wouldn't be able to do that without that permission being given.
Maybe I'm just more empathetic than you, Jenni, as I'm learning through this. Because
okay.
When I read this, I immediately, dozens of coworkers of mine over the years, I was like, this was them. And I never had or knew how to describe it. And I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning, like when it talks about this model employee behavior, and you see that these employees that sort of get propped up, but you see the behind the scenes stuff that leaders don't see, and you think that person is miserable. They're miserable. They never show it upward, but you see it in them. I will say, I've probably never been described as a model employee. Do I do my work? Do I show up on time? Yes. You're not going to get an instant yes. I've craved conflict at times. I do respond, maybe not heroic, but I do respond. But I see that in other people, and I see how it just drains them. One point of view is that you see them like overachieving, but the other side is that people don't see what it's taking out of them to do that. And I actually think this is where I think putting a label on it, I think giving it a name, I think actually helps people understand like, wow, I need to do a better job of recognizing this is a me problem. I'm the pattern in it. I have to establish boundaries. I have to understand that. And I'm not one of those people, just so we're everyone listening, whenever I was like, we got to learn to say no more often. I'm actually the opposite. I think especially when you're early in your career, you should say yes as often as you can to get experiences out there and learn what you enjoy and don't enjoy. So it's not about that. It's truly about having a understanding what healthy work means for you. And everyone needs boundaries. Everyone needs to understand their patterns. So I I like it. I think it helps explain some interesting behavior that I've seen where people have been seen as this model employee and they're super engaged. But man, behind the scenes, it is sucking them dry. And I think maybe I wonder if that's some of the
Mm,
negativity that we also see on our beloved LinkedIn from time to time.
I suppose I obviously haven't
No, you
seen it
can't
as much
backtrack
as. No,
now.
I'm not
No,
backtracking. I'm
too late.
absolutely not backtracking. But I as you were describing some of the things that you've seen, when I've seen that, like it's the same as what I would like a savior complex. Like I feel like I've got to save the day, and so they do extra work because they feel like they've got to do it. And I had a conversation with a client the other day where I was like, "But this happened, and directors emailed me, and now I've got to come up with a solution." I was like, "Why?" Like they just go back and go, "Cool, let me know what you've decided." He's not asked you to do that. You don't need to do that. So just say, cool, let me know if I can help, but over to you. And and that to me is this sort of, I feel like I've got to always save the day. I feel like I've all got to be the savior when actually you don't need to be. And maybe that's fawning in a way, but it's not, just not a fan. Sorry.
Hey, clearly. And you know what? That's why people listen to this episode, these podcasts, Jenny, because we're not coming on here just to agree with each other and share what we think we align on. That is the run through of articles that I selected this week, Jenny. We moving into our freakouts. What is your freakout of the week?
So it's hard to have a freak out this week because I feel like I've just sort of come back into my groove of work after being away. So I think my freak out this week is just going to be how cold it's going to be in the UK next week since I've come back from somewhere really hot. And I've had a jumper on and fluffy socks on all day today. But the temperature in the UK is set to really drop next week. And that's freaking me out a bit. Like, I need to get my jumpers out the loft. I need to figure out how to navigate rain all day because it's just feels like it's been just summer for me for quite a long time. So my freak out is not at all related to anything work related. It's grey and miserable here, which is a good job. I'm going to Nashville really in a few weeks because it's meant to be
Yes,
gloriously sunny there.
it better be. Since you did a shorter freak out, I'm going to spend a little longer time on mine, Jenny. First, I'm going to have two. I'm going to have two this week. First, when you're listening to this the week before, I was in Omaha supporting Workshop's Brightside event, which was their second annual event, pulling the comms community together, both in and around Omaha, but people truly traveled in from all over the country to be there. It was a phenomenal event. The team should be very proud of what they accomplished. But being there in Omaha, and a couple weeks before, I was in Sioux Falls, and in between, in my hometown of Indy, I was bringing communicators together. And I've kind of decided, Jenny, this is my new thing. Is I'm going to let everybody else spend time in the New Yorks and the Miamis and the Chicagos and the LAs and those cities. And I'm going to spend more time in the Omahas and the Sioux Falls and the Indianapolises because there's so many great communicators in those markets that just simply want to connect and get together. So I've decided it takes someone to do that. No one has asked me to do that, but I'm going to do that because I see the benefit of it. So if you are in what you would describe as an underserved city, reach out to me. Let's come up with a way. Let's get creative. Let's come up with a way to get communicators together because I want to be a part of that. So that's that first freak out. Second freak out, I want to spend a little time on, which is a post that Jenni Jones made on LinkedIn that we'll include in the show notes. I just wanted to comment on because I left a couple comments on her post, and I just want to explain it a bit more. Jenni's post begins with, "I love you, but I'm not subscribing to your newsletter. If I subscribe to every newsletter invite, I need an extra email account just to hold them all." And she goes into the strategy of why people have newsletter accounts and blah, 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 blah. And this is Jenni with a Y. So I'm going to say now Jenni with an I. Jenni, man, I could not disagree with this anymore. If you truly love someone, and I'm not talking about the romantic love, I'm talking about the platonic love, like professional love, man, subscribe to their newsletter. Like, just subscribe. You have, you know how you could actually, I don't ever rarely delete emails, Jenni. I've had the
Mhm.
same Gmail account for, I don't know, when Gmail came out, I've had the same account. It's not even close to being full. I could subscribe to every newsletter under the sun. I'm not going to run out of space. I just don't understand. Like, if you want to support, if you're not supporting your friends, who the hell are you supporting? So if you truly love someone, you should subscribe to their newsletter. You should go to their events. You should buy their books. You should do whatever it takes. And I think when people read things like this, it actually discourages them from doing the things that they want to do. It sounds like people are now complaining like, "Oh, there's too many newsletters." I actually don't know if there are too many or not. So my comment was, if you want to write a newsletter, please write a newsletter. If you want to do a podcast, do a podcast. If you don't want to do those things, don't do those things. But don't let what you think others are going to think stop you from using your creative outlets. And maybe that's not what Jenni was leaning into, but I just saw that and I was like, no, I want to encourage people to create and build. And your friends and the people that are around you should absolutely support you. And if they don't, perhaps they're not your friends.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because I saw the same post, and we will see Jenni in Nashville in a few weeks. And I did my own post on the
And I
back of it
promise,
because
Jenni, when we see it, it'll be a pleasant experience. I'm not going to come at you about this. It's just my point of
But
view.
I did a post about it because it really made me think about how I've changed my newsletter, which I don't call a newsletter anymore, I call it an email, weekly email, and how I've changed that over the years, and how I'm a big fan of Matt Haig's work, and he wrote a book called Notes on a Nervous Planet. And in that, he talks about editing your choices because you can't possibly do and consume all of the media and things that are out there. So you have to choose the things that are right for you. And I feel like that about newsletters. So there's probably some newsletters that I don't subscribe to, but I subscribe to quite a lot in our industry because that's how I get my news and information. And people that get my weekly email, which is now a letter from me that I send usually every Tuesday. I write it over the weekend, send it on a Tuesday. And it's a mix of advice, stuff I'm sharing with clients or events coming up, and just a way to sort of just chat to people, really. And I get replies quite a lot to those, and we chit-chat about all sorts of stuff. But it's a way of building that connection. And I think that so many people do use a Gmail account for it. Like someone said to me, "Oh, I have all my newsletters in my personal email because if it goes into work, it's just going to get lost in my work emails." And I was like, I love that. I love that you've got a system and that's how you get it. And then you find the time to read it, because there shouldn't really be very much in a newsletter that's so time critical that you can't read it in a few weeks' time necessarily. So I think it's about editing your choices. But I applaud your point about, don't read. If you were going to do a newsletter and you read Jenni's post, you might suddenly feel like, oh my God, I shouldn't do this. And I think both you and I would hate someone to feel like that, when actually your voice deserves to be heard. People will subscribe if they want to, and they are your people. And I think that's the biggest thing I've always taken away from Brene Brown's work is, you want to listen to the people that are the right people for you. And I think that's the bit that's
and I
important.
think I remember I talked about this right when we started this podcast. There's this intimidation of starting at zero.
Yeah.
And we started at zero with this podcast, and we're building it over time. And it's a lot of work, and we enjoy doing it. And it's a lot of work doing it.
Yeah.
I've seen commentary out there of people like, "Oh my gosh, there's just too many podcasts." Well, I don't know. Are there? If people enjoy creating them, then there's not too many. But saying there's too many painters, there's too many writers, there's too many.
Yeah.
No,
No.
there's actually not
No.
too many. So That's my 2 freak outs.
Yeah, but I think I did say this to someone when they said, oh, there's just too many podcasts. And I did comment on a post on that a while ago, and I can't remember who said it. But I said, isn't it weird how we don't ever say there's too many Netflix shows or there's too many films? Like, it's just another medium. And the people that are interested will listen, go watch, go see, let them.
And with those freakouts, thank you for joining us this week. All of the articles that have inspired this conversation are in the show notes, and don't forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and please pass this along to someone you think would enjoy listening or watching. You can also find Frequency on YouTube. Thank you to Poet Ali for contributing music to the show. We'll be back next week with more news, insights, and opinions about everything comms and leadership in workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.